Panting, he runs along the docks, cursing in his mind at the informant, thinking that they didn't agree on this. He is dressed like a Yakuza in a purple shirt with a dark purple tiger print, white trousers and a gold chain. His blonde hair is pulled back and his face shows scars. Cargo containers can be seen around it. He notes that he was supposed to be alone and remembers how confused he is standing in front of a crowd of men in formal suits with menacing smiles on their faces. One of the men grinned ominously. Blood spatter. The Yakuza remembers that 4 children were killed and how the men, dressed in suits and colorful shirts, one by one fall to the ground, bleeding. He's sweating nervously, his mouth hanging open in horror. The Yakuza falls to the ground face down and notices the blood on his white trousers as he gets to his feet. His heart-rending cry echoes through the night docks. A man in a suit and expensive shoes approaches the Yakuza and asks if he has burst into tears. There are tears in the Yakuza's eyes. A man in a black suit with a dark skin color and a gun in his hand asks if the Yakuza should not be harsh and tough. Then he grabs him by the hair and slams him face first into the ground. Blood splattered on the asphalt, and he cleared his throat. The man lifts the Yakuza by the hair and asks with a smile if he is ready to die. Blood flows from the Yakuza's broken forehead, and the man concludes that the Yakuza no longer have a place in Japan. He says they came here ready to fight, and all they met were spineless monkeys who couldn't even kill. He called them scum and slammed the Yakuza's face into the ground once more with a grin. He lies shivering on the ground with his face in the asphalt. Before leaving, the dark-skinned man gave the other men the command to tie a stone to the Yakuza, but not to kill it yet, but to use it as bait because the others would come for it, to which they answered in the affirmative. Raising his head from the ground, the Yakuza thinks that he doesn't have much time left and he can't betray his comrades. Then he is surprised to notice something. He sees a guy with a grim expression and dark hair partially covering his face. The Yakuza thinks that he was here. A dark-skinned man with a smile and a cigarette in his hand turns around and asks, "Familiar face." He added that he thought it was one of his comrades, so they grabbed him just in case. A guy with dark hair and a black and green sweatshirt is on his knees with his hands folded behind his back. The man in the black hat got angry and grabbed the guy by the hair, asking why he was sitting down, and told him to get up, pulling him up by the hair. The boy's blue eyes were calm. He got to his feet, and there was a brief silence on the docks. The dark-skinned man concluded that the guy is an ordinary thief and even a little sorry for him. He stands with a cigarette raised to his mouth, the moon shining over him. He walked up to the guy with a cigarette in his mouth and looked at him with a wild smile, eyes wide, telling him to kill him because they didn't need witnesses. The boy looked back at him calmly. The man in the hat was still holding him by the hair, and the boy's hands were still folded behind his back. The boy looked down. Something caught the dark-skinned man's attention, and as he looked the guy up and down, he noticed that at first glance he was just an ordinary street urchin, and concluded that he had nothing to eat, so he broke into their warehouse. The man said that if he was flooded with building materials, no one would say anything, because this is a common thing for this city. Then he noticed that the guy's shoes were missing their laces. At first, he thought that this was not unusual for a street urchin, but he noticed something, began to sweat nervously, and shouted to kill him now. The guy disappeared from the hatted man's hand and ended up behind him. He raised his fist to strike, and the man in the hat on the block covered his face with his hands, but the guy hit him on the foot. There was a crunch, and the man in the hat shook. The dark-skinned man pulled out a gun. With quick movements, the guy jumped behind the man in the hat and climbed on top of him, wrapping his arm around his neck. The dark-skinned man noticed that the guy was moving very fast, gritting his teeth. The guy reached inside the jacket of the man in the hat. A gunshot rang out, and the man behind the dark-skinned man fell, blood gushing from his chest. The dark-skinned man turned around. The guy continued to fire the gun, not getting off the back of the man in the hat. The men in suits fell to the ground one by one, hit by a single shot each. The dark-skinned man raised the gun at the guy and shot several times, cursing. The man in the hat fell to the ground, hit by 4 bullets. The boy was no longer there. The dark-skinned man was looking in the direction of the man in the hat who was falling to the ground, wondering if he was hit. The guy jumped with a gun in 2 hands behind the dark-skinned man, to the latter's surprise. Holding the gun in one hand, they aimed at each other. The boy's face was calm as the dark-skinned man opened his mouth nervously. A shot rang out. The purple-shirted Yakuza stared at the guy from the ground behind in amazement, noting that he had taken out the mafia single-handedly. The guy holds the gun with both hands, pulls the trigger, but the guy gives a yell, meaning that the bullets are out. He threw the gun at the dark-skinned man, who batted it away with his hand. The discarded pistol spun and fell to the ground. He raised the gun again, but the boy was no longer there. The guy appeared to the left behind the dark-skinned man, leaning his hand on the asphalt with ominously calm eyes. The dark-skinned man turned around in shock and raised the gun again, but with quick movements, the guy was behind him again. The man started to turn around, startled by the guy's speed, but he quickly closed the distance between them and punched the man in the back of the thigh. The dark-skinned man's scream echoed through the docks. Exhausted, he fell to his knees and the guy behind him calmly straightened up. The man was horrified to see a noose-shaped rope being thrown around his neck. The rope tightened, and the man gritted his teeth. With his mouth open and his eyes bulging, he desperately tried to grab onto the rope, choking him. The guy with a calm face continued to forcefully pull on the rope, suffocating the opponent. The veins on the man's face and arms bulged as he tried unsuccessfully to grab onto the rope, and saliva was coming out of his mouth. He looked down at the boy's hands and noticed the burn marks on the rope that bound him, and noticed the Kevlar cord that was being used to strangle him. In horror, the man realized that the guy used a cord instead of shoelaces, and it was definitely not by chance that he was here, and they were originally his goal. The man coughed and kicked helplessly at the ground until the strength left them, and concluded that this guy was the killer. The guy released the cord, and the dark-skinned man's body fell to the ground. The purple-shirted Yakuza glanced nervously at the guy who was approaching him. He held out his hand to the Yakuza and asked if he could stand up without changing his face. The moonshines blew on the back of a guy looking down at the Yakuza. The Yakuza got to his feet, shaking, holding onto his bloody leg and panting heavily without the boy's help. He looked around at the bodies of mafia members lying on the asphalt and, not believing what had happened, concluded that the guy had killed them all alone. He asked the guy who he was as he left. The guy turned around and said he wouldn't say anything, but added that the old Yakuza man had asked him to come get him. He told the Yakuza that he wasn't their enemy. It's been 12 years. The school building stands under a blue sky. The van drives along a brick fence. A guy in a white t-shirt is sitting cross-legged on the seat of the van, his hands behind his head. A voice called out to him and told him to wake up. The dark-haired guy lazily opened his eyes. A light-haired, middle-aged man, the same Yakuza wearing a black shirt with white stripes, a white suit and a gold chain, tells him that it's time to work. Yawning, the guy asked who their target was today. The man in the jacket pointed ahead and said, "Over there." The guy looked back and said he couldn't see. The man replied irritably that he would kill him and told him to look ahead. The guy picked up his gray cap and jacket with a slight smile and looked where they were asking him to go. Boys and girls in school uniforms go to school. The guy noted that this is a school. The man told him that everything was correct and the contract was concluded for a year. He asked him if he was sure he could do it alone and added that he was worried. Grinning calmly and opening the candy bar package, the guy replied that he was no longer a child. The man silently looked at the guy taking a bite of the candy bar, also opening the packaging of the bar. He said he wouldn't have bothered if it was any other place, but this high school wasn't exactly safe, chewing on a candy bar and leaning on the steering wheel. He went on to say that the school was rumored to be full of juvenile delinquents. Leaning his face on his hand and looking out the window of the van, the guy replied, "Yes." Then he noticed 4 guys in school uniforms laughing and talking about something different. One of them threw an empty can of Coke on the asphalt. The boy's eyes tightened in fury. Crows peck at the garbage left on the asphalt behind the departing schoolchildren. The man said that everything has changed, but it doesn't look like there is peace in Japan, and added that there are only more juvenile delinquents, and even the police are no longer the law to them. Crumpling the paper and throwing it out the window, the man added with a grin that he thought it was only getting worse now. The guy caught the piece of paper with his hand and said with angry eyes that it was impossible to litter. The man gave him a tense look and after a short pause, apologized. The guy shouted that the garbage should be thrown into the trash can. The man noted that he is still correct and said that this is why he is worried about him, because he is not used to bending. He put his elbow on the guy's shoulder and asked him not to start a fight. The guy got out of the car with a gray cap and jacket in his hands and said that he would try. He put on a jacket and cap that said Yamada Cleaning. The girls passing by opened their mouths in admiration and walked on, discussing how handsome he was. The guy adjusted his cap, and on his jacket was written his name, Taiga Banjo. The man stared at Taiga from the car with his mouth open. The van's door bore the Yamada Cleaning logo with 2 mops and a smiling, bespectacled man with a mustache. Taiga stands in front of the school entrance. He pulls up the sleeves of his jacket, standing in the school corridor. Behind him on the stairs sits a schoolboy and smokes, in front of him on the floor 4 cigarette butts, and under his feet, dirt. Taiga turns around and silently walks towards the students on the stairs, who visibly stiffened at the sight of him. He dropped to one knee and picked up the butt of his cigarette from the ground. The schoolboy with the short-shaven head bulged with anger, and he shouted out what he was doing. One of the students in the back asks the other if Taiga is working at school because it's the first time he's seen him, but the other replies that he has no idea. A schoolboy with blonde hair also gets angry when he notices the girls who admire Taiga, saying that he is cool. He walked up to the main character and asked who he was with an evil expression. Taiga looked back calmly, and after a short pause, he said what he was going to say. He introduced himself and said that as of today, he was a janitor at their school. He added that he had come to clean up their dirty school, and the boy's face tightened in response. The crowd of schoolchildren passing by opened their mouths in surprise. Taiga lifted the cap off his head and said, "Nice to meet you." The veins on the shaven-headed schoolboy's face bulged even more in anger, and he repeated the protagonist's last words in a loud questioning voice, saying that he was mocking him. Taiga calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out a special capsule with a sharp movement, to the puzzled attention of the shaven-headed schoolboy. He put the cigarette butt he had picked up earlier in the capsule, then turned around and started to leave, telling the students standing on the stairs to keep the school clean. The shaven-headed schoolboy clenched his fist, gritted his teeth, shouted that Taiga was laughing at them, and swung his fist towards his back. Taiga thought about replying, but then thought that it might be better to hit him right away. The schoolboy's fist approaches the main character's face. Traditional Japanese gait. The sign says, "Boss." A large man wearing sunglasses and a mustache, dressed in a white suit with a black shirt and tie, grinned menacingly. The boss is sitting in a big chair with his hands clasped in a lock and his legs spread wide. He said that some people think they don't understand anything about murder and underestimate it. The boss took the face-down photo with 2 fingers and held it up to his face. He asked if there would have been such a young genius in their company then. The photo shows Taiga 12 years ago with a gloomy expression on his face. The boss noted his inhumanity, cold-bloodedness, and antisociality. Taiga's silhouette swings the knife from top to bottom. Silhouette of the main character laughing with his hand on his face. The protagonist's silhouette points the gun forward. The boss grins and says, "A bunch of fools." Raising his palm up, he declares that people born in unfavorable conditions are always rejected by society and cannot find a place in the ordinary world, so Taiga perfectly adapted to life in the dark from an early age. Taiga in a black and green jacket stands in the midst of a scattering cloud of dust with a combat knife in her hand. Blood drips from the blade of the knife. He turns around threateningly, and his eye glows blue. The boss thinks that Taiga knows how to kill like no other, and thanks to his hands, he will always be able to get food for himself. The main character makes 3 quick stabs with a knife. With a smug grin, the boss says that this guy will always have a job. Standing on the floor of his office on his knees and leaning his hands on the floor, the boss asks for forgiveness and says that he has to dismiss them. The purple-shirted Yakuza and little Taiga look at the boss in silence. To the surprise of the purple-shirted Yakuza, the boss says that society has changed and they are living in a new world where there is no more room for murder. He asked if they understood. Remembering this, Taiga looks up. He dodged the shaven-headed schoolboy's punch by bending his torso forward. The shaven-headed schoolboy looked surprised, and 2 guys behind him shouted at him to aim better. In response, he shouted at them to shut up and said that he was just lucky. He threw a straight punch, but Taiga easily dodged it, taking a step back. Shouting a battle cry, the schoolboy struck again, and the protagonist dodged easily again. The schoolboy got angry and continued to throw punches without success, shouting that he would hit, which the others looked at in surprise until he was completely exhausted. A schoolboy with a shaved head, covered in sweat, leans his hands on his knees and tries to catch his breath. A pack of cigarettes falls from the breast pocket of his jacket to the floor. Taiga picks up the pack from the floor and asks if it's trash, immediately adding that the trash belongs in the trash can. The schoolboy with the shaved head was angry again. 2 other students say that the main character is cool and ask if he is definitely a cleaner. A schoolboy with ear piercings approaches them from behind, reproachfully asking if they were afraid. The students gaped at the voice. The schoolboy with the piercings grinned and grabbed Taiga by the collar of his t-shirt. The protagonist stared into his eyes in silence, thinking that he didn't expect to be able to grab him by the collar and noting that he definitely had experience in martial arts. A schoolboy with piercings brought his face close to the main characters and told him not to be conceited just because he was able to dodge the blows of a small fry. With a wicked smile, he told him that he was new, so he would tell him the local rule. The schoolboy with the piercings told Taiga that he didn't care that he was an adult, and if he crawled on top of them, he would crush him. He added, telling him to hide under the bench and keep a low profile. Taiga indifferently asked about the fact that he wasn't going to hit him. The schoolboy asked in surprise. The main character continued by saying that he let him grab him, and asked if he would leave just like that. Anger made a vein swell on the forehead of the schoolboy with the piercing. A teacher in a white sweater and brown skirt with brown hair is walking down the hall with the class magazine in her hand. She turns around, noticing the schoolgirls discussing how a certain guy was cool and handsome, wondering if he will stay with them. They continued their discussion, talking about how cool his voice was and how it didn't look like he was older than them. Raising a finger to her lips, the teacher pondered the word older. She noticed that the new janitor was already there, looking out the window. Then she flinched at the continued discussion about how schoolgirls were worried because he was messing with Jajima and his gang. One of the schoolgirls screamed that they would definitely kick the janitor out of the school. She ran up to the teacher, calling her Ami and asking for help. The teacher calmly asked her to address her teacher properly and told them to go to class instead of chatting away for nothing. They said they'd think about it and ran down the corridor. The teacher smiled and walked on. She thought that Jajima, the schoolboy with the piercings, had gone too far because Jajima was bullying other kids and the adults couldn't do anything, and the teachers just closed their eyes, and she was scared too. She heard the students shouting that there was a fight on the stairs. The teacher thought that she should have the courage to stop this and quickly followed the students. As she tried to push through the crowd of students, she shouted for Jajima to stop immediately, but to her surprise, she found him lying on the floor with his gang, trying to catch his breath. She saw the main character adjusting his cap, not understanding what was going on here. Holding onto the visor of his cap, Taiga asked her if she was a teacher. He said that he had decided to play with her students for a while, and he apologized. He added that he didn't swing his fists or hit any of them, so everything should be fine. She closed her eyes and touched a finger to her cheek. She then told the protagonist that he was fired, much to the protagonist's confusion. The teacher exhaled and added that she was joking and would tell us more about it later. The teacher opens the door and she and the main character find themselves in a room with lockers, a stove, dishes, a sink, a table and chair, and a washing machine. She said it was a janitor's room. Taiga touched his chin with his hand and noted that his hideout was here, to which the teacher reacted nervously. The main character put his hand on the back of his head and asked for forgiveness for showing him everything here, and said that when he got a job, he was told that they would tell him everything here, so he knows absolutely nothing. The teacher waved her hand and told him not to worry because he was new. She noted that it was strange that on his first day, the school did not provide him with a guide. Then she asked him to explain how to use the equipment. Taiga thinks that if the information about the object is not provided in advance, then he needs to use someone who can provide him with all the necessary information. He concluded that she could become an insider and leak all the information to him. The main character looks at her with a gloomy face. He thinks about how the room is locked and she has nowhere to run, but she still acts nonchalant. The teacher turns on the gas stove and burns herself. Taiga notes that she has a beautiful figure and is physically developed, but she definitely doesn't have any combat skills. He notices that she is very kind to the person she met for the first time. The teacher smiles awkwardly, saying that she was a little scared. Taiga thinks about how he needs to see if she'll turn out to be an informant, which means he should build a friendly relationship with her. The main character's focused gaze becomes increasingly grim and menacing. He introduced himself and said his name was Banjo Taiga, much to the teacher's surprise. He came closer to her and explained that he wanted to introduce himself. The teacher noted that she, too, had not yet introduced herself and asked for forgiveness. She said her name was Ami Yoshino and she was the homeroom teacher of Class 2B. Taiga paused for a moment, then called her Ami. She thought about how he'd called her by her first name so quickly. With a beaming smile, the protagonist thanked her for her kindness and said that he would be grateful to her for the rest of his life. Ami looked confused and said, "You're welcome." She then awkwardly asked him to tell her what happened to Jajima and the others, noting that Taiga didn't use violence. Opening his breast pocket, he replied that he was just cleaning up the trash. Ami looked at him questioningly, and the protagonist showed her the contents of the cigarette capsule. Taiga noted that he was surprised that they smoke on the school grounds. Ami's face tightened and darkened. She bowed her head and asked for forgiveness, in response to which the main character asked why she was apologizing. She looked away and said that she didn't want to be rude, but it was best not to stand out in this school. The main character's face darkened. She added that this time he was lucky, but among high school students there are much more dangerous guys. Taiga didn't say anything in response. As she left, Ami smiled and said that she had to go and had a lesson. He watched her go with a serious face, thought about it, and realized that it looked like making friends with everyone was going to be hard. There is laughter in the noisy classroom, and a guy with red hair and a hoodie under his jacket sitting on the desk. Yusei Kakawa, Class 2B, asks Jajima about what he lost to the new janitor, adding that the whole school already knows about it. Jajima clicked his tongue in exasperation, gritted his teeth, looked away, and told him to shut up. Akakawa, laughing, told him not to get upset, calling him the strongest second year, and added that he would be called a crybaby. The man asked him if he was making fun of him. A girl with dark hair tied back in a ponytail, Shoko Heroes, Class 2B, called the boys barbarians, saying that they always fight for some title of the strongest, and added that this is why they are so unpopular. Akakawa shouted at Shoko to shut up and added that the girls wouldn't understand them. Then he turned his attention to the girls discussing the new janitor, talking about how good-looking he was and how cool he could fight. One of the girls said that he won without hitting once, and asked if their boys had a chance. The girl approached a student with light brown hair who was sitting at her desk, called her Anna, and asked if she had seen the new janitor. She calmly replied that she hadn't seen him and asked if he was really that cool, to which she was told that he looked like a real idol. Anna thought about it and opened her eyes and smiled, saying that it meant that they would meet soon. The girls stared at Anna's shining flowing hair and began to admire her self-control, calling her an adult and noting that she was used to walking with handsome men. Another girl noticed that they discussed this handsome guy too often. Akakawa gritted his teeth in exasperation. The guy with the shaved head noticed that the girls talked too much. Akakawa asked what kind of handsome guy he was, saying that he was a janitor, which meant he must be some old fart. Then he shouted, looking at Jajim, asking how long he was going to let the janitor do whatever he wanted, and whether he realized that at this rate, he was going to lose all his reputation. Jajima said irritably that he understood. Then, with a worried face, he added that Taiga was really dangerous. He said he didn't think anyone would be able to beat him if it was a one-on-one battle. The guy in the white shirt behind him asked him what he was saying. Jajima turned around, but the dreadlock guy grabbed the back of his head and slammed his head against the desk. He told him not to talk nonsense, and that Midorikakai wouldn't let the janitor get too cocky any further. The face of a large dark-skinned guy with long black dreadlocks looked menacing. A schoolboy with a shaved head shouted in horror, calling him the year. The guy's name is Midorikakai Alex Goda, Class 3D. Goda stands menacingly with his hands in his pants pockets, wearing a green t-shirt under a white shirt. Behind him are several schoolboys with menacing expressions. Jajima, holding back the blood from his nose, apologized and said that the janitor was really very strong. Goda irritably asked him about the fact that he had a washcloth instead of a brain. He leaned close to Jajim's face and told him that if Jajim was really strong, he needed to hit the weak spot, and asked him if he was speaking correctly. Jajima looked scared. Goda said that beginners should know their rules, citing the example that they have no rules in fights. He smiled ominously and cracked the palm of his hand. Ami is walking down the school corridor with a class magazine in her hands. Several schoolchildren call out to her, calling her Amit. She turns around and sees three schoolboys smiling ominously. One of them was armed with an iron pipe, the other two with iron and wooden bats. Taiga reads the folder signed as object information. He closes it and puts it on his lap, saying that he has roughly figured out the rules for cleaning the school grounds. He smiled ominously and said, "Perfect." His face returned to calm and he said that he would just follow the instructions and do his job when there was a knock on the door. He opened the door and looked out, wondering what it was, and noticed the phone on the floor. When he picked it up and looked at the screen, he was shocked to find a video call, on the other side of which Ami was tied up in a dark room with a white cloth tied around her eyes, asking what was going on, where she was, and asking someone to save her. Taiga asks where she is right now. She says she doesn't know and starts talking about second years, but they cut her off. One of the guys puts his hand over her mouth. A schoolboy with blonde hair holding a phone says that the time is up and announces the game Find the Kidnapped Teacher. He tells the protagonist that if he doesn't hurry up, Ami might get hurt badly. Taiga stares at the phone screen with a grim face. The dark-haired guy is squatting on the ground, holding Ami's head, and the blonde-haired guy is sticking out his tongue. The video call ended and the phone screen went blank. Taiga paused for a moment, then glanced nervously to the side, asking how things had turned out like this. Residential apartments. Ami is sitting on the floor blindfolded, her hands tied to the window. A guy with dark hair and a guy in a hood are standing in front of her. A guy with long hair, Masuda, calls out to them rudely and asks why they are so close to her, adding that he should be the first to try her out. The boys notice him in horror and greet him, calling him senior. Masuda walks over to Ami and squats down in front of her, telling her that it's important to present yourself properly and smiling ominously. He says he's the second best third-year kid, the right-hand man of the year, and a real gentleman. Smiling ominously, he touched his mouth with his thumb. Takashi Masuda, Class 3D, self-proclaimed right-hand man of the year. Lifting Ami's face with one hand and removing the blindfold from her eyes with the other, he notes that she is beautiful and asks why he hasn't met her before. Ami looked back at him and shook with fear. Jajima ran into the room, asking Masud to stop, telling him not to touch the hostage because she was completely defenseless. Enraged, Masuda stood in front of him, asking him what he was going to order him around, reminding him that he was the second strongest among the third-year boys. Jajima added that he doesn't care about Ami, and if he wants to, he can even punch her. There was a pop behind them, and everyone in the room turned to look at the entrance. Masuda, with an evil smile, said that he had come, grabbed Ami with his hand, and told the main character that he was just in time. He shouted that he was told that he had taught the second years a good lesson, and threatened that if he made one wrong move, Ami would be in trouble. Taiga said that they didn't understand him and he didn't care about her. Everyone opened their mouths in surprise, including Ami. He walked over to Ami, showed her the phone he found with an indifferent face, and asked if he could throw it away. Ami is perplexed about what is happening. On the back of the phone, you can see a photo of Ami with a woman with black hair and stickers in the form of butterflies. Taiga explained that he had picked it up, but he wasn't sure if he could throw it away, so he came to check with the owner. Masuda tightened his grip on Ami and asked the protagonist if he didn't understand what was going on at all. Ami screamed. The schoolboys behind him crunched their fingers as they approached Taiga. Masuda shouted at him to be obedient and prepare his muzzle. Someone said they didn't like it. Masuda shouted to his followers not to leave a single living spot on him. The students ran towards the main character, ready for a fight. Taiga turned around and dodged the blows by crouching down, causing the three students to punch each other in the face in a circle. They fell to the ground and Taiga stood in front of Masuda. Jajima and the shaven-headed schoolboy watched from the sidelines. The shaven-headed schoolboy thought that this was his chance because he was exposed from the back and rushed at him, swinging his fist. Taiga dodged, and the blow landed on Masuda's face. Masuda, blood streaming from his nose, did not move and angrily asked where he was aiming. The shaven-headed schoolboy stammered an apology. Suddenly, a Kakawa jumps on Taiga, kicking him in the leg. Taiga falls down, and a Kakawa shouts in his face in glee and swings his foot to kick him. He kicks his face, saying that it's going to feel like a soccer ball. To his surprise, he finds that it wasn't Taiga who kicked him, but Masuda. Holding back the blood from his nose with his hand, Masuda shouts at the protagonist, asking how he is doing and whether he doesn't care what happens to the hostage. Taiga lies listlessly on the floor, then stands up in one motion and says that he didn't lay a finger on them. Masuda shouted at him to stop dodging and put himself under the blows. Taiga adjusted his cap and looked away. Jajima, with a sinister smile, announced the time of reckoning and slammed his fist from below into the protagonist's face. Taiga noted the strength and speed and thought that it would be hard to dodge. Taiga was sent flying backwards by the impact. Masuda was delighted that Jajima had hit his shot and praised him. Then, with a puzzled expression, he noticed that Taiga was flying backwards towards him. Taiga fell on top of Masuda, and they fell to the floor. Enraged, Masuda asks what it was and if he deliberately flew into it. Still sitting on Masuda's legs, Taiga says he doesn't know what he's talking about because he's the one who's being beaten up. Masuda shouted at him to shut up and get off him. Taiga smiled and said that he didn't need to be a punching bag anymore, much to Masuda's surprise. The main character explained that this is because the hostage is now safe. Ami is standing behind Taiga, who has covered her with his hand. Smiling, the main character added that they only had to escape. Masuda screamed in panic. The protagonist's face became serious and he asked them to answer the question. He asked about the fact that abduction, imprisonment, violence, and attempted rape are considered crimes in this country. He added that it was all self-defense. Smiling ominously and stretching his arms, Masuda said that even though Taiga did it with the hands and feet of second-year students, their rule is that when they are hit, they must be in response. The protagonist's fist smashed into Masuda's face. He's lying on the floor, unconscious. Jajima, a Kakawa, and a shaven-headed schoolboy look on, shocked by the protagonist's strength. Taiga said that he was forbidden to fight, but it can't be helped since they have such a rule. He concluded, self-defense. Taiga is standing with her fist raised, and Ami is standing next to him, looking at him. Ami recalls that when she was in high school, this started happening to her all of a sudden. Ami's torn sports t-shirt is covered in cuts. She explains that they damaged her personal belongings, mocked her. Students in high school uniforms smile wickedly. She says she doesn't know the reason, but the consequences just hit her. Ami concludes that she was just being bullied. Ami in her high school uniform hugs her bag and cries. She thinks about how there was no one on her side and she was desperate. Ami says that no one knew what she was going through and she couldn't even talk to her parents about it. She thought that at least the teachers would be able to help her, but they just turned a blind eye. Ami stands hugging her bag, surrounded by middle school students with evil smiles, while a gray-haired teacher in a gray suit stands with his back to them. She says that school time was a torment for her and there was no hope on the horizon. No matter how much she dreamed, she couldn't imagine a future where she would be happy. She often thought about wanting to commit suicide, but one thing kept her going, her dream of becoming a teacher, and she had succeeded. Ami smiles contentedly. She dreamed of being a good teacher who is always close to her students. She thought that she should help them, and that the children should not suffer, but in reality everything is much worse than she imagined. She couldn't see everything from where she was sitting, and the teachers were also getting hurt by particularly problematic students. Ami thinks about how her hands were tied, how every day she was crushed by her own helplessness, until Taiga appeared before her eyes. After Masuda was defeated in self-defense, all the other troublemakers fled. Taiga then took Ami's hand and quickly left from there. Another teacher found Masuda unconscious. He kept his mouth shut because he didn't want anyone to know that he was defeated by the janitor, and no rumors were spread about the incident. A red sneaker crushes Masuda's head. Taiga thinks about how the third-year girls who wanted to crush him aren't doing anything yet and are keeping quiet. Goda is sitting in a chair, one leg crossed over the other, one foot resting on Masuda's face. He grinned ominously and said it looked like their new janitor was capable of something after all. Gota said they would call a temporary truce for now. Taiga said in his mind that he was going on a date with Ami. He dresses in blue jeans with a chain, a black t-shirt and a white shirt, looking at himself in the mirror. He reflects that if he dresses too brightly, he will be too conspicuous, and it is always better to look solid but not flashy. His colleague from the company, a former Yakuza with blonde hair, standing behind him with his hands folded in front of him, notes that he recently got a job and is already going on a date. Then he asks why he called him. Taiga gracefully turned around and asked how he liked his clothes. After a short pause, the man said that he had no sense of style. Taiga replies that he has collected all the information about the latest fashion trends. The man replies that he has a sense of style like a schoolboy and that he does not understand what a woman wants at all. He covers his face with his hand and exhales heavily. The man tells him with a smug smile that adult women need a strong shoulder and they only fall in love with a reliable and solid man. He lists standing in an elegant pose, hairstyle, costume, perfume, facial expression. He asks him to look at it, adding that everything should radiate solidity. Taiga replies without turning around that he heard him, which annoys the man. The main character says that he has to go, and the man asks if he is serious about going in this form. He looks after the main character in surprise and notes that he really left. With a worried look on his face, he asks if he's sure he can handle it. Crowds of people walk along the night street of the city. Taiga spots Ami, who greets him. She is wearing a blue blouse with a long white skirt and an open coat, and a white purse is slung over her shoulder. She pushes her hair behind her ear and smiles warmly at him. Ami asks if he's been waiting too long, and Taiga replies that he just got there. He notices that she's staring at something and asks what's the matter. Ami asks why he didn't put a chain around his neck. Taiga replies that hanging it around her neck is dangerous and impractical in a fight. Ami suggests that he go and asks if he drinks alcohol, to which he replies that he does. She flashed a beaming smile and was delighted, saying that she would show him around a restaurant. They clashed their beer glasses together and a toast was made. Ami waves her hands around, showing him a table full of meat with a roaster in the middle, and says that she's giving him a treat to thank him today. Flexing her hand with tongs in hand, she suggests that she roast the meat. Taiga stops her and grabs a pair of tongs as a fighting weapon, telling her that he will do the frying. Ami awkwardly notes that it sounds ambiguous, and Taiga agrees. Taiga abruptly opens her eyes wide and puts the meat on the brazier with graceful movements of the tongs. He notes that thick chunks of marbled beef can be tough and not particularly edible when fried incorrectly. But if you understand the very nature of the meat and take into account the directions of the fibers, the meat will come out soft, and she will be able to enjoy the richness of the taste of marbled beef. Ami swallowed nervously as she watched Taiga adjust the meat with the tongs. With a serious face, he serves a piece of fried meat with tongs and asks for a taste. She wonders how much he knows. He said that he had to understand meat at his last job, adding in his mind that he cut, not ate. Ami picks up the meat with her chopsticks and says, "Bon appetit." She puts a piece of meat in her mouth, her eyes glisten and she says it's delicious. She notes that the cooking method can completely change the taste, and tears come out of her eyes, which Taiga notices. As she washed it down with beer, she noticed that it tasted even better with beer, and he suggested that she eat more if she liked it so much, putting a new piece of meat on the roaster with tongs. With a clumsy grin, Ami asked if she could have a bigger drink tonight. Taiga agreed, saying that he would walk her home later. Swaying from side to side from the alcohol, Ami asks the main character if he has a girlfriend. He says no, and she jumps up, slamming her hands down on the table, asking if it's really not, and Taiga answers in confusion that he really doesn't have one. She sat down, saying it was weird and she thought he was popular. He replies that he thinks it should be more popular among men. Ami asks him what kind of nonsense he is saying, and explains that she is surrounded only by students and old teachers. Taiga asks if she is interested in younger or older men, but she says that the age difference is too big. Ami then added with a drooping face that she was a teacher and didn't have time for love. Taiga wondered if this was the right time to ask about the school situation and told her that he would like to talk to her about school. Ami replied with a grim face that it was nothing special, just like any other school. She explained that there are those who are bullied, and there are those who are bullied, and irresponsible adults turn a blind eye to this and do nothing. She added that she didn't say it should stay that way, but there was absolutely nothing she could do, and that she was just as pathetic, her hands clasped in her lap. Then Ami exhaled and waved her hands, shouting about why things weren't going her way. Taiga replied that he was no better, and looking down, said that he had only recently started working as a janitor and didn't even know about the self-defense rule. Speaking of self-defense, Ami puffed out her cheeks and said that she shouldn't go too far either. Taiga excitedly asked if he had gone too far. Ami replied with a smile that she was still grateful that he had saved her. She said that he used little force and subdued the students without resorting to violence, and that she sincerely admired him. The main character looked at her in surprise. She added that if she was as strong as he was, she would be able to change everything, and asked how he learned all this. Taiga replied, experience from a previous job. Then he explained that in our time, many companies do not welcome violence, so it was difficult to find a new job. Ami smiled awkwardly and wondered where he had worked before. Then she remembered something, sat down next to him, and said she had a request. Ami put her hand on the protagonist's chest and asked if he could teach her how to make them obey without violence. She was looking at him with serious, burning eyes. Taiga thought that this might play into his hands, and he would be able to get information from her more effectively, and then the informant would always be at his side. He agreed, and Ami smiled happily. Taiga then added that there was a condition. Ami tensed questioningly. He told her that she should tell him everything that was going on at school. Ami asked in surprise if that was all, and Taiga said that it was very important to him. She agreed with a smile and offered to exchange contacts. They exchanged contacts, and Ami looks triumphantly at her phone. Taiga's phone only shows 2 contacts, Tatsuo Yamadura and Ami Hashino. He looked at the phone screen with a serious face and said that now he has 2 contacts. Ami asked about being the second one and assumed that the first one was someone from the family. Taiga thought about it and replied that Tatsuo, a former Yakuza with blonde hair, might fit the family's description, calling him a bro. Ami thought about what he meant by big brother and decided that he had a difficult situation in the family. Ami thanked the main character and he returned the favor. When they went outside, Taiga asked her to come over to him. He grabbed her wrist with one hand and her waist with the other, and she blushed in disbelief and asked what he was doing. Then he put his hand on her stomach and thought, not bad. Confused, Ami asked her to let go. Taiga released her and apologized, while Ami looked down at the floor in embarrassment. He said she had good abs and asked if she worked out a lot. Blushing and moving her hands profusely, she said that she was already at an age where it was easy to gain weight, so she was doing fitness and going to the gym. Taiga pondered and thought, so nothing out of the ordinary. Ami turned around and offered to go before they attracted too much attention, to which Taiga agreed. Suddenly, they noticed a plump middle-aged man in a business suit and a girl in glasses and a sundress walking in front of them. Ami asked, Soma. Taiga asked if it was an acquaintance of hers. She replied that it was a student from her class, and Taiga assumed that she was walking with her father. Ami thought about how she wanted to check if she was getting involved in something, and suggested that she follow them up for a bit. The main character agreed. Ami watched them, peeking out from behind the advertising sign while Taiga just stood there. He told her that there was no need to hide like this and told her to just go quietly. He asked her to pay attention to how many people there were and said that it would be better to just blend in with the crowd and explained that the unnatural behavior was too prominent. Taiga told her not to follow directly behind them, but to walk a little diagonally, adding that if possible, it would be better to follow the sidewalk on the other side of the street. Taiga explained that they should do everything possible so that the persecuted do not find out about their intentions. He then said that their target was Ami's student and she might recognize her, in which case they would just pretend to go about their business and not notice them. Ami noticed that he knew a lot about it, and he said that he had to do it at work. In her mind's eye, she assumed he was a detective. Then she pulled herself together, saying that it was best not to be distracted, which Taiga told her not to worry about, and that he wouldn't lose sight of them. Ami noticed the way the man put his arm around Soma, putting his hand on her shoulder, and noticed that it didn't look like a father hug. The main character assumed that they were dating. Noticing that Soma was looking away uncomfortably, Ami noted that she didn't seem to be interested in the man in that regard. Even though she doesn't want to say it, Ami said that it looks like he's her daddy. Taiga asked again. She said it was a man you were dating and sleeping with just for the money. Separated from the main characters by the crowd, a man and Soma walk down the street. The man smiles, putting his hand on her shoulder. Soma is nervous. Taiga thought it was a part-time job and said that she was doing great, to which Ami retorted that there was nothing to praise her for. She noted that she is a diligent student with excellent grades. The main character asked about the situation in the family, and Ami replied that they have an ordinary average family. Taiga said that people aren't always what they seem. Suddenly, the chased pair turned a corner and Taiga and Ami hurried after them and found themselves on a street full of pink lanterns and signs. They noticed Soma yelling at the man to stop while he was holding her wrists and that they didn't agree on this, which the man didn't agree with. She nervously tells him that he said they were just going to have dinner. The man replied with a grin that he thought it was clear enough and urged her on, saying it would be quick. Soma shouted back at him that she wouldn't do that to someone like him. The man irritably asked what she was carrying and what she wanted, offering money. Ami rushed forward, asking the man what he was doing. They were afraid, and the man released the girl. Soma turned around and was startled to find her teacher. The man poked Soma in the shoulder with his finger and asked if it was an acquaintance of hers. Suddenly, Soma ran away. The man turned to Taiga and Ami in exasperation. Taiga covered Ami with his hand and asked the man what he was going to do. He shouted what they cared and told them to leave. Ami shouted that she was responsible for this girl. The man asked if she was a teacher and was surprised that Soma was from a high school. A crowd of aggressive people approached Taiga and Ami from behind. The red-haired girl says that Soma ran away with the client, and after addressing Ami as a teacher, asked her to take responsibility for her, smiling ominously. Ami recognized her as her student, Kusamoto. Kusamoto was surprised when she realized that her teacher was standing in front of her. Ami asked her what she was doing at this late hour. Kusamoto interrupted her in a panic, and Ami said with a serious face that she couldn't turn a blind eye to this. A voice rang out, amiably urging everyone to calm down. A smiling young man with a shaved head stepped forward and bowed apologetically, hands still in his pants pockets. He urged not to shake the air unnecessarily. Ami asked who he was, and he introduced himself as Noriyuki Sanzo. Raising his head, he explained that he works for a service that brings wealthy adult men together with young energetic girls. Still smiling, he reminded me about dating apps. He said they do the same thing. Ami retorted that Soma wasn't of legal age yet, and they were engaged in child molestation. Noriyuki, still smiling, replied that it wasn't their fault, but the middle-aged man's fault. He opened one eye slightly and looked at him with a cold-blooded gaze, and the man was startled. Noriyuki put his hand on his shoulder, looking at him with dead eyes, but still smiling, and said that he tried to take an underage girl to the hotel by force and called him a bad customer. The man protested that they had not told him anything about it, and he thought that she was no longer a child. Walking slowly towards the man, Noriyuki warned that he was like a Buddha, so he only forgives 3 times. With a sinister smile, he told him to work his head off and remember that he had told him that she was still in high school. The man shouted that he hadn't spoken. Noriyuki asked if he might not have heard correctly. He replied that he didn't exactly say so. Noriyuki asked if he was sure. The man started to say that the man hadn't told him about it, but he interrupted him with a punch to the face, which sent the man flying to the side and hit the wall. The veins on Noriyuki's face bulged with anger and he screamed, cursing at him for warning him. Noriyuki's face returned to its former good-natured smile and he once again begged Ami's forgiveness, and he started to walk away, dragging the man on the ground, holding him by the collar of his jacket. He said that he would take this unlucky client to the police. Ami wanted to stop him, but Taiga told her that they had to leave because no matter how suspicious it was, they didn't have any proof. As she left, Ami glanced at Kusamoto, who looked away nervously. The next day, there was laughter in Class 2B. Anna asked what Hoshino and the janitor had left behind. Kusamoto, laughing, suggested that they were looking for a love hotel. The schoolgirls participating in this conversation laughed. Anna replied that she didn't think Ami was that kind of person. Kusamoto suddenly remembered and said that she watched yesterday's broadcast on PayTube and that she liked it, and she also wants to try this makeup, in response to which one of the schoolgirls said that she would look like an ugly girl. Anna smiled and said that different cosmetics are suitable for different people and that it is better to use what is right for her. The schoolgirls said that Anna is a beauty with any makeup and complained that there is no justice in this world. Speaking of uglies, Kusamoto recalled and looked at Soma with disdain. She sat with her head bowed down and twitched when she felt her gaze. Kusamoto leaned over Soma's desk and clarified that Ami had called Soma in after school. She approached her face and with a threatening look told her not to dare say anything to her. Soma continued to sit in silence, her head bowed down in fear. Kusamoto clicked her tongue in exasperation and called out to her as she left that she hoped she heard her, adding that she was annoyed by her. A blonde-haired guy wearing a blindfold was looking at this scene with a serious face. The school bell rang for recess. Taiga walks down the hallway with a sign warning about wet floors and a mop. He thought about the fact that there were too many people in the hallways during the big break, and decided to start cleaning up the seats away from the classrooms. As he was getting ready to leave, he heard shouts from the women's bathroom, like someone was taking money from someone. Taiga placed a cleaning warning sign in front of the entrance of the women's restroom and entered it. Several schoolgirls, including Anna and Kusamoto, surrounded Soma. Kusamoto pretentiously asks why there is so little, and if she could have gone to the hotel with him. Soma protested that this was not what they agreed upon, to which Kusamoto replied that the client's wish was the law. Soma said it was wrong and looked to Anna for support. Anna looked disgusted and asked who she was looking at. Soma was startled. Anna went on to say that she and Erica were involved in this business together and that she should speak up if she had something to say. She said that she was not her assistant and she was just asked to act as an intermediary and asked not to look at her. Soma retorted that Kusamoto wouldn't let her get a word in. Anna let out an exasperated sigh and said with a grim face that she hated people like Soma, laymen who could never finish what they started. Soma was stunned with horror. The schoolgirl whispered to Kusamoto that Anna was ruthless, and Kusamoto agreed with a laugh. Kusamoto ordered Soma to listen and said that her job was to cuddle stupid but rich adults, for which she gets a lot of money, and then it was Kusamoto's turn, and she was blackmailing their rich client for groping a minor. Kusamoto's face broke into a devilish grin. She added that they were both professionals, and asked Soma to work hard to do their work like a professional. Soma pursed her lips and quietly obeyed. Still grinning, Kusumoto was satisfied with the answer. Then she said there was still something important to do and turned on the water pressure going into the hose. Kusumoto pointed the hose at Soma, who opened her mouth in horror and told her to stand still and not move. A girl's heart-rending scream rang out. Then laughter. Soma stands wet from head to toe, her fists clenched. Anna told Kusumoto that she had gone too far, but Kusumoto replied with a smile that it was necessary. Smiling slyly, she said that if Soma caught a cold and left school early, she wouldn't have to meet Ami. Taiga said that she didn't have to go anymore. Kusumoto whirled around at the voice and asked who it was. Taiga played a video recording of Kusumoto's words where she talks about their working conditions on his phone. He showed a phone showing Kusumoto hosing Soma with water and said that he had captured everything that happened and would pass on the video. The women's restroom was silent. She shouted at the main character why he even went to the women's bathroom, saying that he should be ashamed of himself and calling him a pervert. Taiga stepped forward and asked why he should be ashamed if he only came here to do his job. Taiga stands in a pretentious fighting stance, wielding a bucket and a mop. Shocked, Kusumoto said that he was crazy, and the girls decided that it was better to just leave. They ran out of the bathroom, running past Taiga, and Kusumoto said she would remember that. The protagonist adjusted his cap, and Kusumoto peeked out from behind the wall and warned that if anything came up about what had happened today, she would set the Yakuza on him. Taiga reacted to these words and thought about the fact that there were still Yakuza in their country. Meanwhile, at Yamada's cleaning office, a mustachioed man in a Hawaiian shirt exhaled cigarette smoke. This is the former boss of the Yamada clan, the current president of the Yamada Cleaning Company, Yamada. He asked again, Yakuza as bodyguards for the stars. Then he added that he couldn't even imagine. He asked what was in fashion now, trying to remember the right word. The man in the white suit sitting across from him assumed that he was talking about the revelations, and Yamada said that was it. He said that in their time there was no internet, and all the dark deeds were easy to hide, and now you can incite hatred and fierce debates with the slightest stuffing. He added that without the information known to the former Yakuza, there would not have been so much exposure on PayTube. The man in the white suit was listening with his hands clasped together, smiling. Yamada laughed out loud, saying that before they could even blink, Japan had become a peaceful country. The man said that Yamada's smile is a real proof that the Yakuza are now living peacefully, and said that thanks to him, he learned a lot of new things. Yamada replied with a raised index finger that they were now an officially registered company that worked honestly, and that he didn't think there were many Yakuza left in our time. The man adjusted his round glasses with a smile, said that he understood everything, and thanked Yamada for his cooperation. In the women's restroom, Soma's clothes are drying on the stall doors while Taiga is mopping the floors with a mop. Remembering Kusumoto's words, he wonders if the Yakuza is still afloat, but decides it's too early to tell, especially since it doesn't matter right now, and glances at Soma, who is sitting on the floor wrapped in the main character's jacket. She looked downcast, then turned to the main character and thanked him for the jacket. He asked her what grade she was in and said he would bring her a change of clothes. She replied that she didn't have a change of clothes with her and that she had nowhere to go either. She buried her face in her hands. Taiga told her that she could stay here until he finished cleaning, adding that no one would come in here. Blushing, she was surprised that he wasn't angry. He asked why he should be angry if he didn't know anything and didn't stop cleaning the floors. She protested that he had seen her with that man. He replied indifferently that he had no reason to be angry, and added that he didn't fully understand what it meant. She stared at him in surprise, her mouth hanging open, and then laughed and said he was weird. Taiga looked at her in silence. Soma looked at the floor and said it was dirty money. He asked her if she needed them. She replied that the opportunity for easy money had beckoned to her and that she had only been paid for dates before, but she didn't think it would come to this. Soma was trembling. Taiga hit the mop handle on the floor as he stood in front of her and told her to tell her if she wanted to share her problems. She waved her hands and asked when consulting was a janitor's job. He replied that the safety of students is directly related to the cleanliness of the institution, and it is his job to maintain it. He explained that it can be said that his duties include creating an environment in which it will be easier to maintain cleanliness. Soma looked up, blushing, then swallowed and lowered her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she said that she was a member of an art club and that she wanted to go to an art college after graduation, but that she needed money for this, and it would be difficult for her family to pay for her studies, so her parents were against it, and she decided to earn money herself. Taiga responded by telling her that she was doing great. Soma looked at him in surprise. He told her that since he was born, he had always done what his parents told him to do and never decided for himself. She lowered her face, blushing, and said that she hadn't done anything to deserve praise. Taiga replied that the method she chose was disgusting, but told her not to give up the dream, but to find another way to fulfill it. She opened her mouth in surprise and looked at him, then smiled and thanked him and asked what she should do now. She explained that if she quits this job, Kusumoto will call her friends from Midorikai. Soma said she was afraid of what she might do. Taiga waved the mop in the air and said that after listening to her, he decided to take care of this business and work with Midorikai. In the janitor's room, Taiga told Ami what had happened while sitting at a table across from each other. He offered her some tea, and she asked for a warm one. She apologized, saying that she should have listened to her. He reassured her that it was even better because he didn't think she would have told her everything. Ami agreed and asked if Soma had decided to leave. Taiga replied that she said she would find a decent part-time job. Exhaling, Ami smiled and said she was glad. Taiga said that something needs to be done about Kusumoto's business right now, and that if we sit back, there might be other victims. Ami put her hand on her forehead and agreed. He asked her if she had spoken to Kusumoto, adding that Kusumoto wanted to call her after school. Ami replied in frustration that she didn't show up. She suggested that maybe I should call her tomorrow and tell her straight out. Taiga replied that he didn't think it would make any difference, and Ami agreed. He then said that if they dealt with Kusumoto, Midorikai would put another student in her place. He explained that such organizations are like insects or spiders, because if one of their legs is torn off, they will still be able to move. The main character's face darkened and he said that according to his theory, to end them, you need to hit the body. Ami replied that it was a strange comparison. Taiga wondered aloud how they could get to the very center of the organization. Ami remembered something and said that the guy said they were some kind of dating apps. Taiga picked up on her idea and said that they would look for them on third-party sites or dating apps. On the phone screen in the hands of the main character is written, online dating. On the phone screen in Tatsuo's hand, online dating is also open. The voice thanked him for waiting. A pretty girl with dark brown hair pulled back in two ponytails jumped out behind him and told him that he was cool and her type. Tatsuo replied that he was glad to hear it and that today he would show her how real adult dating works. The girl said it sounded like fun. Looking at the girl wearing a pink sweatshirt and a white skirt, smiling innocently, he thought that she was naive and didn't understand anything. Tatsuo smiled wickedly and thought that modern children were stupid. Tatsuo takes a shower. A full-length dragon tattoo can be seen on his back. A girl wearing a white lab coat looks at a mug of hot drink. Tatsuo, also wearing a white lab coat, wipes his head with a towel and asks her if the hotel is stylish. She smiled, agreed, and said it was her first time in such a place. He approached her with the menu open and asked if she had looked at the menu, noting the swanky local cuisine and complimenting the service. She laughed and admired how much he knew. She looked into the envelope with the money and asked if he was sure that he wanted to give her such a sum of money just like that. After changing her clothes, Tatsuo told her not to worry and that she could pick them up. He explained that he had been told to spend it on whatever he wanted, so there was nothing to worry about. She was delighted and thanked him, then asked if he would ever call her again. Tatsuo asked with a grin about her lack of money and said that he would think about it. He said he had to go and put the hotel bill on the table. The girl waved her hand vigorously and said goodbye, saying that they would see each other again. Tatsuo raised his hand as he approached the door and said that it would be nice in a little while. In front of Tatsuo are several guys, including Noriyuki. Tatsuo rubbed his cheek with a finger and said that he didn't remember asking Noriyuki to meet him. Noriyuki showed him the phone and asked if it was in the photo. The photo shows the girl he was with earlier wearing a white robe over her naked body and Tatsuo without clothes. Tatsuo clutched his head and shouted that he would never have thought that he would be so divorced at his age. He knelt down with his hands on the ground and said that he was so sad that he was going to cry. Two guys pulled him to his feet and told him not to give a concert. Noriyuki smiled and invited him to take a walk somewhere. Tatsuo said that he understood everything and escaped from the guy's hands, adding that he wasn't going anywhere. They came to the door of a building with a play sound sign. Taiga stands at a distance and watches them. One of the guys hurries Tatsuo, who tells him to shut up. Taiga adjusted his cap and thought that everything was going according to plan, and that Tatsuo was very good at playing the real scumbag. He followed them into the store, and the clerk demanded that he stop. Taiga turned around and said with a threatening face that he had come to clean up. The seller asked who he was and what kind of company it was, adding that he did not remember such a cleaning service working with Midorikai. Taiga thought about what he should do and noticed the seller's clothes, which made him angry. Leaving the salesman unconscious, Taiga dusted off his hands in satisfaction. He stripped the salesman of his clothes, leaving him lying in his underpants, remarked that his uniform fit him perfectly, and said that first he needed to determine how many enemies there were and where they were. He dropped to one knee and listened. There was singing coming from the booth numbered 201, and Taiga assumed it was just a regular customer. There was laughter from the next booth, and someone said he was next. The main character decided that here, too, an ordinary client. From the next booth, a female voice was saying that she had a boyfriend, to which another voice responded by saying what a fancy bag he had bought her. Taiga decided that this was also a regular customer even though they weren't singing there. He heard a knock and peeked around the corner. He saw Soma in the hallway, which shocked him. Soma was staring blankly at the floor, and Taiga couldn't understand why she was there. A voice behind called out to the main character, asking him to look in his direction. Taiga turned around, and there was a man with earrings in front of him. The man asked him if he had a minute. Taiga's eyes tightened when he saw the man in front of him wearing round glasses with a snake-like smile, and he knew that he was strong. Several people were sitting on the sofa opposite Tatsuo, including Noriyuki, Kusumoto, and Anna. They asked him how much he could pay. Tatsuo replied irritably that he had already said that he didn't have any money. Kusumoto asked if he was joking and understood the situation he was in. One of the schoolgirls shouted that he was just an old fool. Anna gave him a scornful look, calling him a freak. One of them told Tatsuo to stop pretending when Soma came through the door. Everyone paid attention to her. Kusumoto jumped up to her and furiously asked her why she was here, assuming that she wanted to make more money. She said she came to tell her that she wanted to leave. Kusumoto slapped Soma across the face, and her glasses flew off her face to the floor. Enraged, Kusumoto shouted at her that she was an accomplice and not to act like she was determined to become righteous. She kicked it, and one of the guys caught her by the shoulders. With a malicious smile, Kusumoto said to make sure that the thought never occurred to her again. The guy grabbed Soma's wrist, ignoring her protests, and grinned, saying that he would have to punish her. Noriyuki looked at this with a smile on his face, then turned to Tatsuo, asked for forgiveness, put his hands in a lock, and told him to ignore it, looking at him with cold eyes. Tatsuo said that even though he was forbidden to wave his fists, he couldn't ignore it, and stood up. Smiling, Noriyuki asked again. The guy yelled at Soma to calm down and twitched, trying to grab her while she struggled desperately, but they saw Tatsuo standing up and stopped. He grabbed the guy who attacked the Soma by the face with his hand and threw it to the side, breaking the table with it. Soma looked at the scene in disbelief. Tatsuo asked if she was okay and handed her the glasses. Soma replied that she was fine and thanked him. Shaking with anger, Noriyuki talked about Tatsuo not giving money and smashing up the room, but he is like a Buddha, so he forgives 3 times. He stood up from the couch, still smiling, his face bulging with veins. He told Tatsuo to pay up and get out. The man casually excused himself and tossed him a coin. He said it was enough money for a sucker like him. Noriyuki yelled in a rage that Tatsuo was laughing at him, calling him bald. A man with glasses approaches Taiga. He realizes that he is from Midorikikai and asks what he wanted. The man told him not to pretend, and that as soon as he saw him, he immediately revealed it, because such strong guys do not work at the reception in karaoke. He took out a combat knife and apologized, saying that he would have to deal with it, explaining that he had such a job. Taiga with a serious face and Tatsuo with a sinister smile thought that they hadn't had a serious fight in a long time. A bespectacled man stands in front of Taiga with a knife in his hand and realizes that a knife can't scare him. He noted that ordinary people would have already flexed their muscles reflexively, but Taiga is completely calm. The man thinks that he is used to fighting, but he is used to killing, so no matter how good he is, one accurate blow and his life will end. He twirled the knife in his hand and decided to see what it could do with a sinister smile. He lunged forward, thrusting his knife forward. Taiga pulled the knife hand away from him with a calm face. The man looked at him with a grin and raised his foot to strike, aiming for the head. Taiga calmly blocked the punch with his hand. The man stopped smiling and wondered who he was. The main character asked him if he would attack again, and announced that this meant that it was his turn now. He thought about the fact that in a fight with an opponent who has a knife, you need to aim at the joints of the hand in which he holds it. With a quick movement, he slammed his fist into the man's arm, and the man gritted his teeth. He noticed that the man had easily closed the distance between them, but he would have time to block with the back of his hand, which he did. The man concluded that this was better than potentially losing his fingers. He thought that neither dodging nor blocking would work otherwise, and concluded that he was strong after all. The man took off and ran around the corner. Taiga chased after him, thinking that he was different from the ones he had fought before. After turning the corner, the main character cannot find the enemy. A knife flashed behind him, and the man leapt at Taiga with a crazy smile, raising the knife to his head. He dodged and slammed his outstretched palm into the man's face, causing him to drop the knife and fly away. Getting up from the floor, the man said that he caused a lot of problems. He said that he mistook him for a street brawler and asked the main character about his military training. Taiga stared back in silence, his face immaculately serious. The man said that no one would help him, and he would not be able to return the knife, smiled and said that there was nothing to do and that he would have to take it seriously. He smiled ominously as he put on his black combat gloves. Cursing, Noriyuki shouted at Tatsuo to show him the quality of the local service. They are standing opposite each other with bottles in their hands. They screamed and hit the bottles, which shattered, spilling their contents all over the room. Tatsuo notices that the bottles weren't empty. Another guy jumps at Tatsuo from behind, swinging an iron pipe. He notices this and dodges by stepping to the side. He grabs the boy's head and slams his face into the floor, knocking him unconscious and shaking. Enraged, Noriyuki tore open his jacket, shouting at Tatsuo for ruining his jacket. Tatsuo started to undress, yelling at him that he was actually the one who ruined his suit because the alcohol was his. Baring their muscular torsos, Noriyuki and Tatsuo glared at each other. Noriyuki picked up the iron pipe, and Tatsuo asked him if he was sure that he would be able to take it out with his thin hands, adding that he would move more slowly. Noriyuki shouted at him to shut up and lunged towards him, hitting Tatsuo in the torso with the end of the iron pipe. He coughed in pain and fell back against the wall. Tatsuo fell to the floor, trying to clear his throat and catch his breath, and Noriyuki smiled and said that it might slow down a normal person, but if you know how to use it, it's a completely different matter. Noriyuki stands in a fighting stance, armed with a long metal pipe and smiling ominously. Sitting down, Tatsuo clarified that it was Bijutsu and said that he didn't expect it. Noriyuki noticed the dragon tattoo on Tatsuo's back and noted with a smirk that he was a Yakuza. Tatsuo, standing up, corrected him that he was a former Yakuza. Noriyuki agreed, saying that it was obvious because now they were all going back in time and the underworld had turned its back on them and that they were all nothing and nothing. He threw another blow with the pipe, this time at Tatsuo's face. Noriyuki laughed viciously, enjoying how lucky he was to be able to beat up a real Yakuza. As he continued to hit Tatsuo's body with the pipe, he noticed that he had been hit by some weakling, but he didn't mind. Noriyuki added that he was already tired of beating up ordinary people. Tatsuo screams in pain as he hits him on the floor with the pipe. Noriyuki rolled his eyes up in pleasure, saying that he got goosebumps whenever he imagined the sight of a Yakuza crying in pain and begging on his knees. Tatsuo addressed him as Neobutta. Out of surprise, Noriyuki stopped throwing punches. Tatsuo asked him about the fact that it was normal for him to torture people and he enjoyed it. He told him with a smile that he was playing a tough psychopath, but in fact he was a small fry. The smile faded from Noriyuki's face, and in a rage, he raised the metal pipe above him to strike, and Tatsuo put his head under the blow. The girls watched in suspense. Noriyuki said that was all, glaring down at Tatsuo angrily. He tried to remove the pipe from his head, but to his surprise he couldn't move it. Tatsuo grabbed the pipe with his hand and told him that he wouldn't believe how many times he had to go through hell, and told him to consider Tatsuo as his regular customer. He smiled ominously, and his eyes glowed blue. Noriyuki looked at it in shock, saying that it was nonsense. Tatsuo held up the phone with Noriyuki holding it and asked if he knew the name of this pose. He answered his own question that it was a home run announcement with a satisfied grin.